Good morning. Everybody bright and awake this morning? You know, we're moving towards Easter Sunday. You can see it coming around us in the flowers. Somebody said, March showers make April flowers. Well, that's a new saying. I was thinking about it. On the bright side, we're losing an hour of sleep, but we actually lost an hour of rain, is what I look at it. So we're looking at the Easter story, of course, and we're looking at the different characters this year in the Easter story. We're not going chronologically, but we're looking at the different people involved in the Easter story. We looked at the women last week, and so today we're going to start with Peter. Okay, we're looking at Peter, who he was, and what we have to learn from his life. And so that's where we are. And we're going to start off by looking at the story, and then we're going to look at it carefully. But let's look at first. This is an episode at the end of Peter's time with Jesus in which he really messes up, okay? So this is not his best moment. In fact, it's probably his worst moment. Surely it's his worst moment, but I think it says something about who he is, how he responds to it. So in Mark 14, beginning in verse 3, it begins this way. They took Jesus to the high priest. This is after Jesus had been in the Garden of Gethsemane, after he had the Lord's Last Supper. And early in the morning, they took him to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the teachers of the law, they all came together at Caiaphas' house, and Peter followed him at a distance. The other disciples didn't. They ran off. Peter at least stayed near where Jesus was, into the courtyard of the high priest. And there he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. Now, when I heard this story, I often thought, well, this was outside kind of where Caiaphas' palace was, but it's really more inside. So this is a map, and you can see this a reconstruction of what Caiaphas' house may have looked like. And the courtyard was kind of in the middle of the complex. It wasn't that he just kind of went to this backyard of Caiaphas' house a long way away from the house. This was like within the structure even. It was open air, but was in the middle of it. Yeah, this picture shows that he's in the courtyard right there in the middle. And then later, when he is pointed out by the servant girl and he goes into the lower courtyard. And so that still is within the complex. Okay, so while Peter was in the courtyard, and we have two things going on. Jesus is being tried in Caiaphas' house. And the way the story is put together in Mark is you have two storylines going at the same time. And you switch from one to the next. And Jesus is being tried and stands up and says who he is and does all the right thing. And Peter really does all the wrong things. And Peter was below in the courtyard. One of the servant girls of the high priest came by, and she saw Peter warming himself. This was in March, April in Holy Land. It's about like it is, so it could have been like in the 40s. And she looks at him and she says, you were with Jesus. You were the Nazarene, she said. But he denied it. At the same time, Jesus is saying that he is who he is. Peter denies it. And he says, I don't know or understand what you're talking about. And the two words for know there, I don't know and understand, those are two different words. One's talking about intellectually, one is emotionally. So he's denying Jesus in all parts. And he denied. He said, I don't understand what you're talking about. And then he went into the entryway and a rooster crowed, lower courtyard. Now, some of your translations don't have that and a rooster crowed, but I think that it was there. The translators have different choices, but I think that it was there. And it makes sense to the story, certainly. In some of the early manuscripts, it's not there, but I believe it's there. And in verse 69, it says, when the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow was one of them. So not only she said it, but now she's telling other people. By the way, notice Peter didn't run off. You know, if it had been me, I don't know about you, but if you saw it going bad, I'd have run off. You know, I would have said, "I see you later, guys," especially when somebody pointed you out. And people are getting in, this is a really rough time. But he goes into the outer courtyard. She goes to some other people who said, "This fella, he's one of them." Again, he denied it. And after a little while, those standing near said to Peter, so this time it's not her, but other people. So more and more people are starting to point Peter out. And they said, "Surely you're one of them because you're a Galilean." Why do they say that? Because he has an accent. Okay. I was talking to somebody today that was going to Alabama next week. Have you ever lived in Alabama or gone to Alabama? You need an interpreter to go to Alabama. God bless them. I love them. They're my people. But boy, they have an accent. And you would know it immediately if this person was from parts of Alabama. And they knew that he was a Galilean because of his accent. Now, he began to call down curses, and he swore to them. "I don't know this man you're talking about." So when he swears to them, he's saying like, "So help me God, I don't know him." That's swearing. And curses is more like profanity, blankety blank, "I don't know him." And so here's Peter. Not his best moment, huh? And then the rooster crowed the second time. And Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he does. And he breaks down. He falls down. He bitterly weeps. And so this is his worst story. So I want to think about this story and think about Peter. What made Peter a great leader? I mean, if you look in Acts, the book of Acts, the first half of Acts is about Peter. Peter was the one who organized the group, who picked a new disciple because Judas had died and they needed another disciple. He organized that. He also preached Pentecost, and thousands of people came to the Lord. He was one of the first leaders of the church long before Paul, and he was a great leader. Most list of disciples list Peter first. So who was Peter? And what made him who he was? And before I really get into it, I want to think about this. If I were to quiz you guys today and ask you what made him great, these are some of the answers people might say if you know something of the Bible. You might say, well, he's probably great because when he was at Caesarea Philippi, and he said this statement when Jesus said, "Who do people say I am? Who do you say I am?" And Peter stood up and said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And you might say, that's what made Peter. Somebody else might say, well, it was on the Mount of Transfiguration when Jesus had 3 of his disciples come with him in an intimate setting, and he revealed who he was. You might say, well, that's what made Peter, what made him a great man. And what I'm suggesting today is what made him a great man was this great failure. Just like Mary Magdalene last week. We talked about that she had demons. She was possessed. She went through some hard things, but that shaped her into who she could be. Sometimes God can use whatever goes on in your life. In fact, sometimes you have to really develop into the person you are. You have to go through hard times. There was a guy who was a composer. His name was Sir Edward Elgar, and he was conducted music. And there was this young lady, a soloist, who was singing one of the songs that he had written. And she was young. She was really young, and they asked for him to listen to her, and she sang with this beautiful voice. He listened to her, wonderful pitch, faultless technique, and after she'd finished singing, the guy that invited him said, well, what did you think of her? And he said to the guy, Elgar responded, well, she's good, but she will be great when something happens to break her heart. She'll be great when something happens to break her heart. And what he's saying is, yes, she has faultless technique. She has great pitch. She has great skill, but she doesn't feel it yet. She hasn't had something happen that will make her become the person that she could be. We live in a world today where I think we've forgotten that, and we won't present ourselves as wonderful, flawless in many ways. I think about resumes. Okay, ever notice in resumes people always promote themselves? I mean, this is just standard in glowing terms. Oh, I mean, I heard somebody put it this way: how would you write, "I changed a light bulb" on a resume? Okay. Here is how you would write, "I changed the light bulb" on a resume. Proactively implemented concrete, cost-effective solutions that brought both horizontal and vertical impact to the working place by raising the visibility of colleagues, illuminating the office, and fostering a more inclusive working environment. Or single-handedly managed the successful upgrade and deployment of the new environmental illumination system with zero cost overruns and zero safety incidents. By the way, you know how a Baptist changes his light bulb? Change. My grandmother gave me that light bulb. We don't need to change. But we live in a culture today where people don't like to talk about, anything that is bad. Even politicians, they all talk about how great they are, how smart they are, how wonderful they are, how gifted they are, what a remarkable people they are. And what I'm suggesting today is what made Peter remarkable was this moment of failure, this moment of where he did terrible. And so if I had to describe three different statements that said who Peter is and who he was, the first one, Peter, the macho man, okay? He was macho. Now, macho is a Spanish word, okay? It means big, macho, tough guy, tough, fierce. A man who's macho would never sip tea or pet a kitten, He's not manly enough. Now, when I was a young person, if you talk to me about the macho man, you know who I'd remember? This guy, Randy Savage, the macho man, okay? If you had a t-shirt like this, I like you already. The macho man. Me and my brother would have wrestling matches, and we would sometimes dress up, and Macho Man wore these goggles. They look like ski goggles. Okay. And he would come into the ring, okay, instead of all the other 80s wrestlers, they would play this heavy metal music. He would come in with the pomp and circumstance from a graduation ceremony, okay, because that's who he was. He was the greatest, the macho man. Oh, yeah. Now, Peter had a little of this in him. This macho, that he's a tough guy. Give you a couple examples. Mark 8, verse 32. This is, he was listening to Jesus, and Jesus told him how he's going to have to be crucified and go through all this. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus. And the word for rebuke here is epitomao. Epi means down, tomao's on the knuckles. And so if you ever had somebody hit you like that, that's almost what Peter's doing here to Jesus. Epitomatos, he rebukes him. And when Jesus turned and looked at his disciple, he rebuked Peter back. And he says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Because Peter was macho. He thought he was the man. He thought he was the one that always got it right. And he had something happen to him to change his mind. Then in Mark 14, Jesus is predicting what was going to happen to him in the upper room. He said, "All you good guys are going to fall away, by the way. For it's written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I've risen, then I'll go ahead of you into Galilee." And here Peter interrupts him. Peter says, even if all of you guys fall away, I'm not. I'm the macho man. Truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, you macho man. Yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice. By the way, it's ironic that a rooster is the one involved here, because what do we know roosters as? Cocky. I wonder if it's a macho rooster. Okay, and the rooster, cock-a-doo-doo, you know. And you yourself will disown me 3 times before that's going to happen. And Peter insisted, nah, even if I have to die, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same. He did. You know? He thought he was all that. He wasn't all that. And it took what happened here in the courtyard for him to figure out who he really was. Because sometimes we think we know who we are, but you don't know what you are until something pushes in on you. I think it was a boxer once, was it George Foreman, says, everybody's got a plan till they get hit in the nose. That changes you when you go through something. So Peter here, that he thought he was all that, but that's part of who he was. Second part of who Peter was not only was a macho man, he was a disloyal man. He would have denied this earlier in his life, but I mean, this is what's here. Mark 14:66, let's look at this again. It says, Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls. I mean, he's not even scared of a Roman centurion. He's not scared of the Roman soldier. He's scared of a little servant girl, a girl. I'm just saying, for the macho man, you wouldn't think that he would be like this, but he was. He was scared of her. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. Now, the word here for look is blepo. It's the same word that's used later. In a different version, the Gospel of Luke, it says Jesus saw Peter right after he denied him the 3rd time. Blepo, she looked closely at him. You ever had somebody look you in the eyes? Give you a good look? So, I see you. I see you. She says, I see you. See, she had probably heard him or saw him with the other disciples, because they'd been there in Jerusalem that week, and Jesus was really popular, and she'd seen him as a leader. She says, you're with the Nazarene Jesus, she said, but he denied it. He said, I don't know, I don't understand what you're even talking about, girl. I went out into the entryway. He goes out. He was by the fire. They could see his face. So he goes out where you can't see him so much, and a rooster crows. He didn't even hear it because he's macho. Maybe he hears it. Doesn't say he hears it. Servant girl saw him there, and she said again to those standing around, hey, guys, this guy was one of them. They're trying the leader in there. And again, he denies it. 3rd time, after a little while, those standing near Peter said, surely you're one of them. You're a Galilean. They heard his accent. And then he's Peter, He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. I swear to God, I don't know this. I'm not one of them. I mean, he didn't run off like the rest of them. He's there in the courtyard. And maybe he's thinking, after his first time when she accuses him, he's thinking, well, it's going to be okay. I'm going to let them know who I am soon, so I'm not going to run off completely. But, he gets worse and worse. And this time, immediately the rooster crowed the 2nd time, and Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him, before the rooster crows twice, you would disown me 3 times. And he broke down. When's the last time you broke down? He collapses like a broken beach chair. This great, brave, macho guy, and this affects him. In 2011, there was an earthquake in D.C., and I barely remember it, but At the time, it damaged the National Cathedral. It cost millions of dollars in repair. Just a few seconds did all that damage. And I think that this event in Peter's life rocked him to the core and hurt him. But the good news is it didn't destroy him. In fact, he used it. It propelled him to become who he was. So not only is the macho man and disloyal man, but he's the recovered man. Maybe you're like that today. Maybe you've had something happen in your life and, not many people know about it, but maybe a lot of people know. I don't know. And you think, well, God can't use me, huh? Maybe he couldn't use you like he can now because of that. Maybe what propels you forward is not the failure in the back. It is not the successes in the back of your life, but the failures. It's interesting that as I was looking into the Macho Man, I found this biography I watched on the life of this wrestler, which I liked a lot. Anyway, the storyline goes is when he was a young person, he was a baseball player, and he wanted to be a professional baseball player, and he made it to the minor leagues, and he was doing really well as a catcher. Randy Savage, he was doing great as a catcher, and something happened, and it broke his arm. It dislocated his arm. It was broken, his right arm, and he could no longer throw to second. And so he decided to change to be a first baseman. And so he was pretty athletic, and so he could throw both-handed. So he started throwing left-handed, and he made it through 3 cuts, but the last cut, he was cut from the team. And his mother says he was so upset that he came home and he broke all of his baseball bats. And that he said, I'm never going to play baseball again. And he turned to become a wrestler, which his family had done. And he became really good at it. And it was that failure that actually pushed him in the right direction and gave him something to really strongly do. And so this is what happened, I think, with Peter, the recovered man. Let's look a little bit at the story. In Luke 22, verse 61, the Lord turned and blepoed straight at Peter, looked at Peter, gave him an eye, just like that girl had done, according to the account of Luke. And Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And so this riveted his life. He remembers this look, but it doesn't destroy him. Now, how do we know that? Well, there's little clues. First of all, what you can find in the book of Acts, what he does. But there are other clues. In Mark 16, verse 7, when Jesus is resurrected, he said, the angel says, go tell his disciples and Peter. He's going ahead of you in Galilee. There you'll see him just as he did. Why does he have to say and Peter? I mean, Peter was a disciple. Why couldn't he just said, go tell my disciples? Because Peter was going to be the leader. And he focused on Peter, says, tell Peter too. Peter needs to hear it. There's this story in the account in John. I'm not going to read it, but you may remember it. In John, Jesus is resurrected and he's fishing. Actually, the disciples had gone fishing, and Peter had said, let's go fishing, and they all went fishing with him. They caught nothing, and they're out all night, and they haven't seen Jesus. They don't know what's going on, really, and they're fishing, and they come back to the shore, and there's somebody there by a fire on the shore, and he says, throw your net on the other side of the boat. And they said, we've been fishing all, ain't got nothing. He said, just do it. And so he throws the net out, and they catch this big, huge thing of fish, and one of the disciples says, it's the Lord. And and Peter jumps in the water. He doesn't even wait to go back to the shore. He jumps in the water and swims as hard as he can to Jesus. And Jesus goes through this period of discussion with Peter. He says, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I do. And he says, you want to feed my sheep? And he said, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I do. And he says, take care of my lambs. And then he said a third time, are you really, really, really sure that you love me? And Peter says, yes, you know all things. You know that I love you. 3 denials. And now Jesus gives him this commission, 3 questions in which he asks, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And it changes Peter's life. You know, he became a great, strong, forgiven man. Took what was in him, what God had put in him, and did remarkable things with it. And we have a couple of small letters in the Bible written by Peter, and in 1 Peter 5 through 11, it's instructive what's here. In the same way, this is what Peter says. He's given advice in his book. He says, in the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. The macho man said this. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Where did he learn this? He learned this that night. Because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. He learned this the hard way. And so Peter says later in his life, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. And he knew this not only intellectually, he knew it from hard knocks. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be alert, of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion. This is what had happened to Peter. The devil wanted Peter to disavow Jesus. And he's looking for someone to devour, but resist him. Stand firm in the faith, because you know the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you've suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong and firm and steadfast. To him be the power forever and ever. Amen. And so Peter here is saying what he has learned and putting it in words that make a whole lot more difference to us when you know the story behind it. He says, humble yourself, be watchful. You know, there was a guy I used to listen to, some of you older folks, Paul Harvey, and he would always tell a story, and then at the end of it, he would say, now you know the rest of the story. Well, that's what we've been looking at here. The classic collapse of Peter, but it changed his life. Good came out of it. In your life and my life, there might not be times where we have to risk our lives to stand up and say, I'm a Christian, but you can make a big difference if you stand up. Even in those moments when you think nobody's looking. There's a story of Hall of Fame baseball player Mickey Mantle. He was on the verge of death after years of abusing his body with alcohol. And he had friends gathered around him in the hospital bed and saying their farewells. And one former teammate who came to his bed was Bobby Richardson. And as a Christian, he had not joined in the wild partying of the rest of the teammates had, and he became a pastor after his retirement. And Mickey Mantle used to make fun of him. He called him the milk drinker. But as Mickey Mantle was at his deathbed, the only person he wanted to talk to was Bobby Richardson. The testimony of Bobby's life amid the jeers of the other team made an impact on his life. You don't know what kind of impact you are having on the people that you associate with on a daily basis. But people are watching. People are watching us. It doesn't say you have to be perfect. Peter definitely wasn't. I don't know if you know, there's a legend. We don't know. It's not in the Bible, but the story goes that Peter died by crucifixion by Emperor Nero. And when Nero went to crucify him, Peter asked to be crucified upside down. Because, according to the story, he thought that earlier in his life, he'd gotten everything upside down. And he didn't deserve to be crucified the same way Jesus was. The great news is that God restored Peter, and that is the same God that can restore everyone who sins. Mary Magdalene, whatever your background is, whatever mistakes that you've made, Jesus knows you like he knows Peter. And he can make your life a blessing to everyone, including yourself. Now you know the rest of the story.